the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. My name is Hassan Shahawi, and as grandson of Hassan Hathout and board member of the Hassan Hathout Foundation, it is my privilege to welcome you to our 9th annual Interfaith event, For the Love of Tomorrow. Now, the Hassan Hathout Foundation is a nonprofit educational organization founded after his death to handle his diverse body of work in the fields of Islamic thought, interfaith dialogue, medical ethics, and poetry. Moving forward, our mission is to spread the message of love in God, inspired by the thought of Hassan Hathout and other like-minded individuals. I'd like to recognize now the board members of our foundation who are unable to join us today, Mr. Dafr al-Dakhil, Dr. Wa'il al-Azma, and my sister, Sara Shahawi, for their continued work in support of the foundation. I'd also like to especially recognize the efforts of our current treasurer, here with us today, Mr. Khalid Tawfiq, who has dedicated a tremendous amount of his time to the foundation's events and initiatives, and without whom today's event would not have been possible. I ask him to stand up and for you all to join me in giving him a round of applause. Here on the left of the hall. Yes. Lastly, I'd like to remember our co-founder, former treasurer, and great personal friend of Hassan Hathout, Dr. Umar al-Alfi, who passed away last year. May God bless his soul and reward him for a life filled with purpose and character. In line with our mission, the foundation has numerous initiatives. First is this event, our annual Interfaith gathering, in which we discuss perspectives on a particular theme across various faiths. Second, we are also now on our 8th year of conducting a national essay contest for middle school students, in which we ask these students to submit essays on the topic of how to grow a loving heart. We then judge these essays and award prizes to the winners in our annual essay contest event held in Long Beach. Outside of hosting events, our initiatives have also included creating an online archive, the Hassan Hathout Library, to preserve his written work as well as audio and video materials. You can browse the library on our website, hhlf.org. Lastly, we also collaborate with other groups on activities which are in line with our mission, such as the annual Hassan Hathout Interfaith Fastathon, which we co-host with the USC Muslim Student Union every year. I would now like to introduce the person behind these many initiatives, the founding president of the Hassan Hathout Foundation, chief of pediatric diabetes and endocrinology at Loma Linda University, and the proud daughter of Hassan Hathout, with whom she shared an undying bond. Ladies and gentlemen, my mother and friend, Dr. Iba Hathout.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. The Quran reads, "Behold, for I have blown into man of my spirit." These divine words resonate with people of many faiths. The term conscience is often perceived as the voice of God within us. I'd like to share a story I witnessed as a child while touring Europe with my parents one summer. Walking along a lakeshore in Austria, we met an old woman and started a getting-to-know-you conversation. She told us she was an Israeli Jew. My father mentioned that he'd been a doctor in the 1948 war over Palestine. We exchanged names and addresses and said our goodbyes. Months later, my father was touched by a letter and told me of an incident from his days in Palestine. An Israeli soldier was injured by a bullet. The bullet was deep in his chest. And then he was about to be attacked by some Palestinians who had just lost their homes, their loved ones, and their homeland. Hathout stood in front of the wounded captive and told them, "You will have to walk over my dead body to touch him." He recited the words of the Quran, "Whoever saves a life, it is as though he saved all humankind." He reminded them of the rights of the prisoners of war in Islam. The crowd left in peace. Hathout removed the bullet, delivered medical care for weeks until his patient fully recovered, and then transported him to the headquarters of the Red Cross. The first news my father received of this patient came 20 years later. It was that letter. Somehow, the man got our address from the lady we met in Austria. By then, he had become a very high-ranking official in Israel. The essence of the letter was, "Thank you for saving my life," and an invitation to visit, which my father had to decline. A few years later, my father received his second letter. The top part was written by the same man, extending another invitation for my father to visit. The rest was in a different handwriting. It was the man's wife stating, "My husband had a heart attack and died. I found this letter in his belongings. I wanted to thank you for giving him 25 years of happiness with our son and family." On one level, my father and this man were ideologic enemies. On another, they were two men who were able to transcend their differences through a common humanity. Sometimes I wonder what could have come about if the two had met again and had more conversation. According to history, that is how some wars end, when people realize the futility of endless killing, heed their common humanity, and listen to the voice of God inside them. Ladies and gentlemen, each of us is a bird with two wings, one material and one spiritual. Both demand balance for our humanity to fly straight and soar high. It is this ethereal dimension that entitles humans, as the Quran reads, to be God's trustees on earth. Have you noticed how a deep spiritual reservoir renders a person, living or dead, eternally powerful and universal? For us to have a serious relation with God, we need to train our spiritual wings and empty our hearts from all that obstructs the entry of God's love and tranquility. We may have to shed old skin, endure some pain, break out of familiar shells, and dispose of multiple layers of ego. That is the eternal struggle, the ultimate quest, the real jihad. We, the Hathout Foundation, believe that the mission statement of Islam is summarized in God's words in the Quran, "We have sent you for nothing but mercy to the worlds." We think of all people, regardless of label or form, as essentially of two types, loving and hating, and we see the way to God as love. It is our conviction that every soul harbors a divine embryo yearning for nourishment, that God is especially present in difficulty, and that a spiritual anchor is essential for individuals and nations to achieve justice and peace. It is our hope that this gathering be not only the birth of new friendships, but also a milestone on our path towards our loving God. I am extremely grateful to our distinguished speakers for donating their time. Thankful to all of you for the beautiful tapestry of religious threads you portray, and mindful of Hathout's verse, "Though the wind that bloweth the sail is the mind, the faith in the heart is the compass to guide. And what good is eyesight if the heart is blind? Lo, we all look so good, but what is inside? Who is right? Who is wrong? Only God will decide." On that note, I hope you can all share the excitement. We are here today for the love of tomorrow. Thank you.
The stage is now ready for our expert speakers who have kindly given their time to share their thoughts on today's theme. Our first speaker is Rabbi Noam Raucher. Noam Raucher is originally from Hamden, Connecticut, and grew up in a home of Jewish educators and leaders. He graduated from Hofstra University in 2002 with honors in Judaic studies and psychology. In 2005, he moved to California to attend the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies and was ordained in 2011. His first pulpit was with Temple Israel in Charlotte, North Carolina. There, he worked to build community across faith and racial boundaries with neighboring houses of worship. In 2016, Rabbi Raucher joined the team at the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center as senior rabbi. In addition to being an ordained conservative rabbi, Noam holds a master's degree in education and is a fellow with CLE, the Clergy Leadership Incubator, a program for rabbis of visionary leadership and innovative practice. Rabbi Raucher has been published in the Jewish Journal, J-Life magazine, and the American Jewish World Service online journal. Rabbi Raucher has also prepared a handout for us today, which we'll be using during his presentation. While the rabbi makes his way to the podium, I ask you to please take a copy of the handout from the stack of papers at the center of your table. Thank you.
Shalom. It is an honor to be a guest here. I am touched to be asked to provide some teaching and so that we can learn about one another today. This is truly a blessed moment, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much to the Hathout family for this opportunity. Thank you. I find myself in a particular position in my life now, a pretty sensitive one as a young father, and someone who is a partner with a spouse and a leader in a community, and that offers me an opportunity simply to be patient and to watch things unfold from time to time. That might be the only type of saving grace I have in a fast-paced world. And I find that that patience is grounded from my tradition. And there are two texts that I brought you today that will help me express my sense of spirituality, the way I walk in the world, what helps me see the world in a particular way. And I'm hoping we can come to know each other better through this study. So I'm going to do that teaching with you right now. The first text we have on this page comes from the book of Deuteronomy. V'ha'im shamoa tishma'u bekol Adonai Elohecha lishmor la'asot kol mitzvotav. In time, if you will listen carefully to the voice of Adonai your God, to observe and to do all my commandments, which I command you this day. I'm struck by that idea of listening carefully. It takes me back to what we might know as the Jewish Pledge of Allegiance, what we call the Shema, where we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." And I'm often curious as to know why it is that hearing is the central sense that we use, the perception that we have in order to understand what God is trying to teach us. Why is it listening? Why is it hearing? Part of me wonders what hearing offers. That it gives us a sense or a chance to understand things in the world that aren't often physically seen. Things that we may miss from time to time. I wonder if there's a danger in judging and appreciating the world simply for its physical and material form. And so this text is stressing to us that one of the things that we should strengthen the most about ourselves is our ability to listen and our ability to hear one another. Did you ever hear or listen to NPR's StoryCorps, created by David Isay? He said he created it because he realized that listening was an act of love. That listening was an act of love, that for all the things that you could do with people, for all the gifts that you could buy for them, for all the time that you could spend, the best thing to convey your sense of love and appreciation to them was 5 minutes of listening. Just paying attention and giving them that opportunity to speak and to share and to be vulnerable and simply to talk when others might simply just drown them out and dismiss them. That truly is an act of love. That reminds me of what you were just saying, Doctor. If, the eyes are blind, I wrote it down. What goal is eyesight if the heart is blind? What goal is eyesight, or what good is eyesight if the heart is blind? Sometimes we need to tend to that inner ear that we have to truly attune ourselves to the things that God is offering us in the world. And this idea of coming to understand something before we actually take an act and dive into it, before we really get to know someone, before we move forward, is actually opposite of what Judaism normally teaches us. Normally, when the Jewish people sign on to anything that God has to offer, the response to God is na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it. You teach us to do something, God. You ask us, you command us in some way. We will do it, and then we will come to understand. It's about the experience. And yet what this text seems to be teaching us more so now is to take a step back and to truly listen and to try to pay attention to the things that we may not actually see in the world. And I wonder what that can really offer us. If we stop looking at the world in physical ways and start looking at it from a different perspective. And that's why I brought the second text with you right here, right now. This comes from the Babylonian Talmud, which was compiled over a couple centuries between 400 CE and 600 CE. It's a collection of wisdom and attempts to try to understand what the Torah provides us. And so what you will see here now is a discussion from rabbis as to what this idea of really listening means and really paying attention. Our rabbis taught, one who performs many mitzvot or commandments, positive commandments or negative commandments, you shall do this, honor your mother and father, you shall not do this, you shall not murder, those types of commandments, all of them included in our tradition. One who has to perform many mitzvot or commandments simultaneously shall say, blessed is the one so-and-so who has sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us concerning the commandments. You get the word commandments in there a lot. You wonder what the focus is that we're talking about. Rabbi Judah ruled that one must recite a benediction over each mitzvah separately, so that each thing that we do in this world, each commanded act, each opportunity to invest life with holiness requires its own specific blessing, whether you are eating food or using the bathroom or praying. That requires its own particular focus and benediction to it. Rabbi Hanina taught that the law was in agreement with Rabbi Judah. But Rabbi Zera questioned, what is the proof for Rabbi Judah's argument? In Psalms 68:20, it is written, "Bless the Lord each day." So he further asked, do we bless God by day and not by night? Thus we are taught, give back to God each day's respective blessing. So also here, offer to God an appropriate benediction for every single thing. For every single thing. Can you imagine how long that would take us? For simply waking up in the world and recognizing that we have our cognition intact. Following that, our eyesight and the ability to dress ourselves and the privilege of having all those wonderful material objects to comfort us in our times of vulnerability and fear. The true abundance that we have. Can you imagine how long it would take to offer those blessings? But I ask, imagine how much more deep life could be if we actually did. We'll continue further. Rabbi Zera taught, come and see that the standards of mortal man are not the standards of the Holy One, blessed be God. According to the standards of mortal man, an empty vessel is able to contain what is put into it, and a full vessel cannot contain it. However, according to the standards of the Holy One, blessed be God, a full vessel is able to contain what is put into it, while an empty one cannot. As it's stated in our Torah, in time, if you will listen carefully. In other words, if you listen, you will be able to listen, but if not, you will listen no more. And a further interpretation suggests if you listen to the old, you will be able to listen to the new. But if your heart turns away, you will listen no more. The beauty of attuning ourselves to God's message and to attuning ourselves to the discipline in investing life and investing ordinary moments with holiness is that we come to see life's cup as being truly full. And all the more so, it being bottomless, it being infinite in space. You can take a look at the cups or the coffee cups that you have at your table right now, and I'm sure you'll tell me that half of them are pretty much full or close to the top, and if you were to pour any more water inside with our limited human vision, the water would simply spill over because there's no much more room inside. But to look at that cup and to look at the world through God's eyes reminds us that there are infinite possibilities and opportunities in the world to invest life with holiness. If only we were to truly take every single thing we do as an opportunity to treat life with sanctity and sacredness. Every interaction that we have with someone, every handshake, every opportunity to say goodbye, every time we have a chance to sit down and eat, every time we open up a book to learn something new or turn on the news, hopefully to learn some good information about the world, there is an opportunity to invest that moment with a sense of sanctity that doesn't necessarily come easily or naturally to people. And yet if we take the time to truly listen, to invest that moment with the opportunity, we can see that they're all over the place. And in time, we will come to see life's cup as being truly full and even overflowing and room for more in there. Room for more beauty and abundance in the world, where in fact there may be great scarcity. And that's part of the way I walk in the world now as a father, as a young leader in our community, and as a spouse. I think about our children and their vulnerability, and I wonder when it will be when we will truly take their education seriously and treat those schools as we do houses of worship, as being places for holiness and sanctity, where children know that they can be safe. And I think about the proliferation of gun violence and firearms in our world and our society. And I wonder, where is the safety? And so I must be that overflowing cup of safety and security for children and the vulnerable in this world. And as a partner who loves their spouse dearly, as being part of their own heart, it troubles me to see the way that women are treated as objects in our world. And it troubles me to know that my wife has fear walking through an empty parking lot at night, clutching her car keys in between her fingers, lest she get attacked. And so I wonder, where's the compassion for women? And there certainly is a scarcity of respect for them as treating them inherently with the dignity that they deserve. And so I must be the abundance of love and the overflowing cup of respect and dignity that women deserve in this world. And if anything, offer myself up as one more or one less man yelling in front of a microphone. And as a leader, I see that there is a scarcity of compassion for those who are truly vulnerable in our society. We have big, beautiful buildings and tributes to wealth and fame and power, the empty things that actually fill a cup eventually. And yet we have homeless on the street, almost everywhere we go in Pasadena. And with the scarcity of food and housing resources, then I myself need to be that overflowing cup of abundance of food. And so I make it my priority to carry food around with me, because I know that even driving in my car, a moment that might seem completely mundane and ordinary can lead me to an opportunity to bring God's light and love into this world and fill it with more sense of abundance than was ever there before. When I hand my bananas and my bottle of water out the window to Maria at the corner of Curson and Fair Oaks, I do so because I want her to appreciate the same abundance that I take for granted in my life. That her cup too should eventually be overflowing. That all of our cups too at some point should also be overflowing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Raucher. Before we continue, I'd like to remind you that we will be having a Q&A session at the end with a full panel of our speakers. And if you have a question during any of these speeches that you hear today, to please write it down on some of the note cards at the center of your table, and those will be collected at the end by volunteers and brought up to the panel so that the speakers may address your questions. Our next speaker is Dr. Gasser Hathout. Dr. Hathout is a physician and professor at UCLA Medical Center. He has published numerous papers in leading medical journals, as well as a highly regarded textbook in neuroradiology. He completed his undergraduate studies in economics from Harvard University, then his graduate and postgraduate training at the UCLA School of Medicine. He has been an active member of the Los Angeles Muslim community for over 30 years, including serving on the boards of the Islamic Center of Southern California and the Muslim Public Affairs Council. He is a leader and frequent lecturer on Islam and is the co-author of 2 books on Islamic thought. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Gasser Hathout.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. So I was told that the topic is toward a deeper spirituality. That's a problem I've been wrestling with for more than 40 years. And honestly, it's even more difficult than if I'd been asked to talk about, how do you lose weight and keep it off. But I think it is actually an essential topic. We are all familiar with the devastation that man wreaks upon man. And I think it is only through the deepest level of spirituality, given that much of that devastation is actually done in the name of religion. So we have to reach beyond the divisive bounds that some people think religion imposes to the common bond of the deepest spirituality, and then and only then, I believe, we'll be able to see that the parable of man killing man over a piece of land is really nothing more than a bunch of fleas fighting over who owns the dog that they live on. And looking at that problem of a deeper spirituality, I found that it's often intrinsically linked to the problem of suffering and its relationship to God's mercy. And in my mind, the main impediment I found as I have struggled with this problem is that our faith is often utilitarian, meaning that we look at faith in terms of a winning business proposition. How will faith help me? And that is what we want from faith, and that's what we expect from faith. And when we don't feel that we've gotten that, we lose the faith or become despondent. And I don't mean to knock that point of view or that level of faith. In fact, I'm still working to try to attain it. Because I think if somebody indeed feels that it is in their best interest to believe in God and to do good by their fellow man, so that they can avoid the punishment of hell and earn the reward of heaven, that person is truly blessed. And the Quran, in fact, even talks about faith in those terms. And I'll say in Arabic and translate in English, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة. God has purchased from the believers their lives and their possessions for the price of heaven. And the verse later continues to say, فَاسْتَبْشِرُوا بِبَيْعِكُمُ الَّذِي بَيَعْتُمْ بِهِ. So rejoice in the deal that you have made. However, the danger of that level is that we often forget that that's a deal that has to do with the hereafter and not in this world. And when we don't get the immediate material rewards that we somehow expect from faith in this world, we feel shortchanged. And the Quran describes this sort of mentality in a chapter 22 called Surah Al-Hajj. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ فَإِنْ أَصَابَهُ خَيْرٌ اطْمَأَنَّ بِهِ وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ فِتْنَةٌ انقلب عَلَى وَجْهِهِ خَسِرَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةَ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْخُسْرَانُ الْمُبِينُ. And among people are those who worship God on the edge of faith. If something good happens to them, they're satisfied. But when a trial befalls them, they turn their back on their faith, such as those who have lost this world and the next, and that is surely the most manifest loss. And this, of course, relates intimately to this problem of suffering. We feel that faith must somehow be an insurance policy against worldly suffering, whether as individuals or as families or as nations. The great Christian writer C.S. Lewis, who, by the way, I read his fictional work Out of the Silent Planet when I was 12, and it had a profound effect on me that has now lasted over 4 decades. He said about this problem of suffering in his book, The Problem of Pain, that man's view of God is, quote, we want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather. And while we Muslims would not use that terminology, we definitely agree with that sentiment. We need to reframe our understanding that some suffering and some sacrifice, while not desirable, may be beneficial and is certainly inevitable. And there is no better way to understand this than the story of Mary, peace be upon her, as told in the Quran. For the non-Muslim audience, we as Muslims believe in the virgin birth of Christ. He is described as a word from God and a spirit from him. And Mary is told, and I'll quote in English from the Quran, and when the angel said, O Mary, God has chosen you and purified you and raised you above all the women of all the worlds. And so, as Mary is pregnant, and it comes time for her to deliver, the Quran describes فَأَجَاءَهَا الْمَخَاضُ إِلَى جِذْعِ النَّخْلَةِ قَالَتْ يَا لَيْتَنِي مِتُّ قَبْلَ هَذَا وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. When the labor pains brought her to the trunk of a palm tree, she said, Oh, I wish I had died before this day and been something gone and forgotten. And I have read this verse so many times in my life, but it is only recently that it struck me that compared to the miracle of a virgin birth, the miracle of a painless labor would have been a very small trifle to add. And yet, even for Mary, that is not the divine ordinance. That is not human life. And so, we need to understand that some degree of suffering, whether it is imposed by others or imposed on ourselves by the sacrifices that we just heard about from our rabbi, may be the way to God's grace. Some Muslim scholars and spiritualists talk about 3 levels of faith. The first they call al-ibadah, or al-ibadiyya. And that is that utilitarian faith that I was talking about, which is having faith so that I gain the reward of heaven and avoid the punishment of hell. And once again, in the interest of full disclosure and so that I avoid the sin of hypocrisy on top of my other sins, I am still working on trying to attain level 1. Level 2 is a surrender to God, not seeking a reward or avoiding a punishment, but in gratitude for his blessings. Then level 3 is neither seeking a reward or avoiding punishment, nor even out of gratitude for God's blessings, but worshiping God simply because that is his due. He has the deservedness, the Almighty, the Creator and Cherisher and Sustainer of the heavens and the earth, to be worshipped no matter what. And that recalled to me the Calvinist view of theistic determinism in Christianity. That view, of course, is no longer very popular among Muslims, Christians, or Jews. But that view stated, and the Calvinists believed, that God decreed before a person's birth who was the elect, who would go to heaven and who would go to hell. And a person was unable to then will faith for themselves. In my mind, that deepest level of faith, and this now again is in my spiritual fantasies. Our society talks about a lot of fantasies, but we never hear talk of spiritual fantasies. Well, I have spiritual fantasies. And in my spiritual fantasy, I am at level 3. I do not believe in theistic determinism, but it wouldn't bother me in the least if it turns out to be true. Each of us has been created for a purpose. And if determinism turns out to be true, and I have been created for the purpose of going to hell, then I need to trust that somehow, instead of delving into spurious details, oh my goodness, this is unfair, how does this jibe with God's justice? The Muslim scholars have said, the created has no rights against the creator. So justice is not an issue. And so instead of preoccupying my mind, as so many of us do when some small setback occurs in our lives, how is this fair? How is this just? Or when we see bigger tragedies. Instead of that, trusting that this somehow serves God's plan, and feeling that regardless of my fate, even if I am sitting in the throes of hell, if I have somehow been of service to this plan, then it has been my honor and privilege to do so. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Dr. Gesser. Last but certainly not least is the rector of All Saints Church, which was a second home to Dr. Hassan Hathout. We are pleased to be joined again in our event by Reverend Mike Kinman. Reverend Kinman holds a Bachelor of Journalism degree from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and a Master's of Divinity from Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. As the Dean of Christ Church Cathedral in St. Louis from 2009 to 2016, he had a particular interest in the cathedral's role in promoting racial and economic reconciliation in St. Louis, and with Christ Church Cathedral was active in the new civil rights movement ignited in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. Prior to Christ Church Cathedral, Reverend Kinman was the founding executive director of Episcopalians for Global Reconciliation and was the founding campus missioner of Rockwell House, the Episcopal campus ministry at Washington University in St. Louis. Reverend Kinman is also the president of the board of Magdalene St. Louis, a 2-year residential community for women recovering from lives of prostitution, violence, and drug abuse. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Reverend Mike Kinman.
Good afternoon. This is an absolute honor, and thank you so much for the invitation. It is an incredible honor and a privilege to be here, and especially to get to go last after listening to these wonderful presentations and realizing how much we have in common and just the wealth that is in this room. We're talking about how to deepen spirituality. And when I think about that in my own life, there's just 3 areas that I want to try to cover about what it means to be grounded. You talk about a spiritual anchor, what it means to be anchored in my life. And I want to talk about a piece of scripture, and I want to talk about a liturgical way we organize community. And then I want to talk about a way of looking at us all. The piece of scripture that I want to raise up is from the Christian scriptures from the Gospel according to Mark. And it is towards the end of the Gospel of Mark. And if you know anything about the Gospel of Mark, it runs really fast. You know, Jesus always has places to go and people to see. And this is coming right at the end, and his face is set towards Jerusalem, and he and his disciples are on the way charging down the road. And there is a blind beggar named Bartimaeus who is by the side of the road. And Jesus and the disciples go charging by, and Bartimaeus cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And the disciples tell him, it's like, "Shut up. He doesn't want to hear from you." Now that could get anyone to be quiet, but Bartimaeus, the scripture says, he cries out all the more, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And then something incredible happens. Jesus stops and he says, "Bring him here to me." And Bartimaeus throws off his cloak and comes to Jesus, and Jesus sets him in front of him, and the community gathers round, and Jesus says, "What would you have me do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "Please, I would like to see." And Jesus heals him, and he can see, and the scripture text ends by saying he joins them on the way. Now, I had read this scripture passage over and over again most of my life, and it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that it became unfolded to me in a new way of what I think may actually be happening here. Bartimaeus is the most on the margins. Probably the only way Bartimaeus could be more on the margins is if Bartimaeus were a woman. Bartimaeus was a blind man by the side of the road, a blind beggar. He was the definition of someone who was inconsequential, that you didn't need to listen to. Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, the definition of the place that was incredibly consequential, that was where the important people were that we needed to listen to. The disciples understood that, which is why they told Bartimaeus to be quiet, and they told him that Jesus could not be bothered with him when Bartimaeus started crying out. But Jesus stopped dead in his tracks and brought Bartimaeus to it. And the scripture says that Bartimaeus threw off his cloak. And if he was a blind beggar, the cloak was all he had. And so Bartimaeus was naked. He was standing there just as he was in all his glory in front of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't just stop himself. He makes the entire community stop and gather around him. And then he says to Bartimaeus, "What would you have me do for you?" He takes the person who is most on the margins, who is most targeted, oppressed, and marginalized, brings him into the center of the community, and lets him set the agenda. And once that agenda is set, reconciliation happens. the blindness, the woundedness, the marginalization, everything that was separating Bartimaeus from the community was removed, and he was able to join them on the way. So when I think about towards a deeper spirituality, particularly coming from my own social location where I am a white, heterosexual, cisgender, Christian-educated American male, if you have a privilege in this world, I pretty much have it. What this scripture reminds me is that what I am called to do, where I am called to find wisdom, where I am called to meet God, is to find those who are most targeted, marginalized, and oppressed. Use my power and privilege to set them at the middle of the community and to let them set the agenda. Greg Boyle, who is one of my heroes, and I know a hero of many in this room, Greg talks about all of us gathering on the margins until the margins disappear under our feet. And so when I think of a deepening spirituality, I need to make sure, as a person of extreme overprivilege, that I am regularly listening for that voice that is crying out all the time. And too often I am not hearing it or telling it to be quiet. And too often I am charging ahead to the important things I have to do and important people I have to see, and forgetting that the way of Christ is to stop and to bring the person from the margin to the center and let the most marginalized set the agenda, not just for me, but for the gathered community. Second thing I want to talk about is a central liturgical practice that we have as Christians and that we have as Episcopal Christians, and it's the practice of Eucharist. Eucharist is depending on who you talk to as a Christian, it is a reenactment of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. And when we have a Eucharistic service in the church, what happens is we bring forward gifts. We bring forward bread. We bring forward wine. We bring forward gifts of money. But really what all that represents is ourselves. What we believe happens in the Eucharist is that we gather around the table and we lay our whole selves on the table, our whole lives on the table. Not just the parts that we like each other to see, not just the parts we like to admit to ourselves and each other, but our whole selves on the table. And we trust that the presence of God is on that table as well, the presence of Christ. And all of our lives get mixed up with each other and with the presence of God. And we believe that what happens in that moment is that God brings out of that something extraordinary that is greater than each of the individual lives on that table, and that binds all of those together. So that when we receive the Eucharist, when we receive the bread and wine, what we receive is not just a piece of Jesus. It is a piece of all of us. And so that if I came to that table bearing a burden or a wound and laid it on that table, now everyone in that community is now helping me carry that burden and sharing that wound. And if I came to that table with a joy in my heart, now everyone in that community is sharing that joy in our heart. And we receive the Eucharist and we strive to have excellent peripheral vision, to realize that as we are receiving, so is everyone else receiving around us. And how can we be a part of that carrying of burdens and celebrating of joys for each other? And so when I think about how do I deepen my spirituality, I think, how am I giving myself fully in community? How am I offering myself fully? The parts of myself that, I'm proud to let people know are me, but also the parts of me that I am tempted to hide. How am I in the gathered community offering my life on the table and encouraging others to do the same, and then trying to live as someone with excellent peripheral vision as someone who looks how God might be using me to help carry the burdens and celebrate the joys of the people who are in this circle with me, knowing also that God wants us to continually expand the circle and expand the circle and expand the circle, so that Eucharist isn't just something we do for an hour on Sunday, but that Eucharist is a way that we live our entire life. Now, finally, I want to talk about something that I've thought about over the past several years again, that is a way of looking at community and a way of looking at relationships and a way of looking at who we are created to be, as we believe that we are created as images of God. One of my favorite early church theologians is a theologian named Irenaeus. And Irenaeus famously wrote, "The glory of God is a human being fully alive." So what does it mean for each one of us and all of us together to become fully alive? And again, when I think about deepening spirituality, one of the things I'm convinced is I can't do it by myself, but we can do it together, that God means us for each other in amazing ways that absolutely shatter any barriers that we might try to put up. And the best way I have seen, or a great way that I have seen to illustrate what we're capable of together, and really, Rabbi, it gets to your point about each of us and all of us being the overflowing cup, is a brief song that a friend of mine wrote. She wrote it based on a line of a Wendell Berry poem. Wendell Berry is an amazing poet and environmental activist. And there's a poem that Wendell Berry wrote where the one repeating line is, "What we need is here. What we need is here." And so I'm going to invite you, I'm going to teach you this song, and we're going to sing it. I'm going to invite you into a little exercise here. I can feel the anxiety in the room raise. So I want you to listen first, and then I'll invite you to sing. So listen first. What we need is here. What we need is here. Okay, I'm going to give those instructions again. Listen first. I'm going to do it twice. Just listen, and then we'll sing. That's hard. Listen. What we need is here. What we need is here. One more time. What we need is here. What we need is here. Okay, sing. What we need is here. What we need is here. Now that you know you can do it, sing it with confidence. What we need is here. What we need is here. I know you can sing it louder than that. What we need is here. What we need is here. We're going to do it a couple more times, and then I'm going to invite you to break out into harmony. Oh. What we need is here. What we need is here. What we need is here. What Can we agree that we just created something beautiful? Now, I wonder how many of us sitting here, if someone had asked you, are you a singer, would have said yes. Maybe some of us would have. The truth is, at least for me, my experience is most of us grow up unless we have, we've been identified as someone who has a beautiful voice and a gift for singing, most of us end up getting told that we can't sing. I had a choir director once who told me that my job was to stand in the back and drone. And the truth is, unless you have a physical disability, everyone can sing. We have the ability to create incredible beauty together. There is no limit to the beauty we can create together if we believe in our capacity to create beauty. Now, the interesting thing about that exercise is in order to do that, we had to do several different things. First of all, we had to believe that we could sing individually. And secondly, the most important organ in making music is not the mouth or the lungs, it's the ear. We had to listen to each other. So we were making sure that we were hitting the right notes and blending our notes in. Part of why I stepped away from the microphone is what made it beautiful is there wasn't one dominant voice. And then finally, when I invited you to break into harmony and you all laughed nervously, wonderfully about that, it was an invitation to take a chance. How many of you tried harmony? Yeah, so a good number of you were brave and tried harmony. How many of you, the first note you hit trying harmony wasn't exactly the note that you were looking for? Yeah, and that's okay. Part of our deepening spirituality is recognizing that God creates us as incredible artists and creators. And part of the creative process is messing up, is hitting the wrong note until we can hit the right note. And there is a courage in that. And so where I want to leave us all in terms of how are we called to live together in our deepening spirituality is to go back to Irenaeus and say the glory of God is a human being fully alive. And I would say even more, the glory of God is human beings fully alive. And we come fully alive when we dare to sing, when we dare to experiment with harmony, when we dare to be that cup that is overflowing for each other. That in a world that tells us to stand in the back and drone, we stand up and say, no, we can create incredible beauty together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Kinman. I'd now like to ask all the speakers to please come to the stage for our question and answer session. And some volunteers will now be going around the room. Here on the right, Adil and Ali, please raise your hands. And please give them your note cards if you'd like to pass any questions up to the front. Thank you very much.
So as the questions arrive, I'll ask the speakers if they believe that pain is mandatory to becoming closer to God. So all of us, and you can choose who would like to start.
I'll go ahead just because I know I'm going to answer it imperfectly, so I might as well start. The word mandatory is a challenging one for me because it invites, at least in Christian theology, into some areas where I really don't want to go, where God is a God who causes pain. And I absolutely don't believe that. I don't believe God's will for us is pain. I know in my life that I am often incredibly self-centered, and there is disorder to my loves. and that ordering my love so that God is at the center can be, and sometimes is, a painful process in the pursuit of a much, much greater joy. And so I think what I would say is I have found in my life that absolutely pain is a part of the spiritual path and part of growing closer to God. But I want to be really clear that I don't believe that's because God causes the pain.
I agree with Reverend Kinman, my friend and colleague, in that I don't think that God causes the pain. I think pain is a natural force that we all feel in the world. Sometimes pain is learning new information, or suffering a mistake of some kind, or it's a physical ailment. But pain is just a fact of the world. And it may not be mandated by God, but I do think pain is mandated by humanity. And that is to say, that given the fact that there is naturally pain inherent in the world in certain ways, that means that the guidance that the Torah provides me in circumcising my heart so that I can be vulnerable to the pain of the world means that being vulnerable is mandatory on me. And so that I at least must be open to the pain in order to bring me closer to my fellow person. And so it may not be God that provides the bridge, but God provides the commandment, at least to be sensitive to that pain, which is a reality in the world.
Well, as I said, for me, there's no better example than the story of Mary. And that if with the miracle of a virgin birth, the miracle, or not even a miracle, we sometimes see it happen, of a painless labor was not provided, that says to me that pain is inevitable as part of human life. It is part of the test. And the question is, will it make me sensitive, i.e., sensitive to the suffering and the pain of others, or will it make me bitter? So I can either pass the test or fail the test, but I don't think any of us will avoid the test. And I'm reminded, there was one gathering, an Islamic Medical Association gathering, where people were talking about that the Prophet was so blessed that he seldom got sick, and that there are all of these, remedies to avoid pain and all. And so when the question and answer session came up, my father stood up and he said, with all due respect, this is ridiculous. The Prophet, peace be upon him, felt pain, he was injured, he bled, he got sick, and in fact, one time he got so sick, he died. And so, I trying to channel level 3, and the question for me, somebody gave me a question, I'm stuck at level 2, how can I get to level 3? I don't know, because I'm struggling to get into level 1, so I can't answer. And I actually had a choir director, he didn't tell me, stand in the back and drone. I was really, truly told, get out of the room. I was the only person in the 6th grade choir, who tried out for choir, who was not allowed to be in the 6th grade. I'm not, saying Carnegie Hall. I mean, this was a pesky public school in Buffalo, but I was told that I'm completely tone deaf and that I could not be part of the choir. So I don't know how to get to level 2 or to level 3, but I think I'm trying to channel level 3. I really don't ask, does God cause the pain or do humans cause the pain? If God were to choose to cause, I have no problem with that. I just hope to then pass that test in the right way, and God knows best.
So this question is on a personal level. How do we deal with fear of the future? And how do we handle grief when people expect us to have overcome it because the loss happened some time ago?
Those are two questions.
Yeah. In terms of how to handle grief, no one can put a timetable on anyone else's grief. We try to do that. Many reasons we try to do that is because other people's grief will make us uncomfortable. And often it connects with unresolved grief in our own life. And I think that the other question about how do we deal with fear of the future, what connects both of those questions is at the heart is what do we do with loss? My experience is that fear is almost always about loss or connected to loss somehow. It can be loss of function, loss of a job, loss of respect, loss of relationship. You show me a fear, I think you can probably find some way that it's about loss. And how do we deal with loss? And how do we deal with grief of loss? I always just come back to that. The answer is community. The answer is meeting each other where we are, loving each other as we are, loving each other, as Anne Lamott says, too much to leave us as we are. But just being committed to being companions on the way. And so that if you have a grief that is weighing on your heart, my job is to be with you in it, to not try to have your timetable for that match my timetable, but also to try to help you not have that grief and loss define you. One of the things that we're always called to do, and it's a joy that we have to do as community, is to help each other see ourselves as God sees us. And that is always about life.
Again, there are two questions. I think, again, I mean, really, I can't imagine walking out of here without some hypocrisy, because there's always going to be some impression that I actually know what I'm doing here, or I'm saying, you know, be like me. But I mean, I think the answer is have this world be small, and therefore no loss can be that big. The prophet said, for me, this world is no more than a man who has decided to stop for a while and spend the night beneath a palm tree, and that it is no bigger than that. And as I said, I've been struggling for 40 years to try to achieve that mindset. I may be a half step closer, but no more. What keeps me going is that I have seen it achieved. It is not, to me, the North Star, and it is not a theoretical possibility. I have actually seen it realized, and so that gives me hope. And some of you may have heard me talk about a friend of mine who was tested in his son. His son was on the brink of death, and I saw his son at UCLA and you know, tried to help. And then some months later, the man was taken ill and was in a deep coma, and they were talking, do we pull the plug, do we not pull the plug? Then some months later, I hear that the man's wife is now ill with a very serious illness. So I pick up the phone and I call him to try to, you know, console him and tell him, you know, it's going to be okay, this will pass, and so on. And when he picks up the phone, you know how they say answer the phone with a smile? This man was beaming. And I'm trying to tell him, you know, it's okay, don't worry. And he, you know, is again, it's not, oh, well, God, alhamdulillah, it's okay, we'll do the best. No, he was beaming. And he said, worry? Why should I worry? When God stops testing me, then I'll worry. So am I there? No. Am I close? No. But have I seen it? Yes, more than once. And I ask God to make me among the blessed that achieve it.
So I do find that the questions, while they do appear separate, in some ways they can be connected, and I think I see it very much in the same way that the Reverend does, in the sense that sometimes grief can be an expression about fear of loss of a future. My wife is currently going through a grief period. She just lost her grandfather about a week ago, and he was very close to her. He was like a father to her, more so than a grandfather. And she was beside herself for a brief period of time because she had just never experienced a loss so deep, and she wonders, you know, what's to come in the future as a result of that. And will there even be a future? She can't see a future with her children and her grandfather now. She only has what occurred in the past. And that's a very jarring circumstance for her because it provides her with another larger sense of uncertainty when it comes to other things in this world. The one thing that death does remind us is really how vulnerable we all really are and how just transient our lives truly are. We think we will live forever, and then a death comes and shows us another way of looking at the world, recognizing that our lives are really fragile and temporary. And so one of the things, though, that it can teach us is how to brace ourselves when life does roll over us with such a great tidal wave. And that is to say that we build up spiritual abs. Now, clearly I don't have those physically because I'm a father of 2 young boys. But I do have spiritual abs in the sense that when life provides me with a tidal wave of emotion or grief or fear or whatever it is that comes and threatens to throw me off balance, that there is something that helps me stay the course, to remain standing. And because the grief came, it allows my wife and also me in other circumstances to reach out to other people through love and compassion and listening and being there with one another, and to also appreciate what life has for those temporary periods when we are with those people, to take those opportunities to cherish life even more with other people that we have in our lives, so that when grief does come or the threat of loss does arrive, we have something that enables us to stand strong, regardless of how powerful that force is, knowing that we've invested time with people that we love, that we have already memories with us that we cherish while they're still alive, to knowing that we truly appreciated them for when they were with us. But if we don't have those abs, right, if we can't recognize where the beauty is in the world and where the holiness is in those relationships and in those experiences, then it's entirely possible, and then grief will come, it will bowl us over, because we don't know what it is to truly appreciate the other things that keep us standing in those times of grief.
One question was directed to me about what I see from the children and the middle school students in the national contest we've been holding about how to grow a loving heart. And in summary, a lot of hope. I am amazed and inspired, and you can watch all the winners' presentations on our website over the past 8 years, at what each of them values as something that triggered the concept of love in their life. And many times they see the role of their parents and how their parents model more than how they teach. It's something that I've seen my mother do, my teacher do, and the stories go and the projects go around that. The little projects that they start within their family to help the homeless or to help the poor. So I was inspired and surprised to see how much faith, creativity, and hope. But I think what we need is more of mention of the word, more of a sparkle, more of curricula that emphasize the concept of growing a loving heart in middle school. A lot of the students that participate are Muslim, and I particularly need more input from Muslim educators about curricula that have love and compassion, which are the center of our religion, to be central in their education, not just in words, but also in action, in how they model it to the students. So another question to the panel was, how do we address the nihilism of our culture?
I've gone first the last 2 times.
Nihilism.
All right.
Culture.
Go for it, Doctor.
Take a stab here. Yeah, I think that's obviously at the core of the problem. Somebody who is spiritual cannot be a nihilist. So spirituality is the antidote, but on a very practical level, I think we have to be raised and nurtured into it. And again, I'll try to give one very practical example in terms of how can we do that for ourselves, for our kids. My wife is not here, so I will take the liberty to share that she is terribly arachnophobic. She has a deathly fear of spiders. And so when there's a spider, or actually any insect, to be honest with you, when there is a spider in the house, there are two choices. Either we take it out or we kill it. And so try to, teach the kids from a very young age that we are going to take the spider outside. And when they were young, they were very annoyed because we have to stop watching TV or doing whatever it is, and we have to try to chase the spider around. He's up in the corner. We have to get the ladder. We get a paper cup. And they asked me, why are you doing this? Just spray it. And I told them, how many people are in the world? And they were young. They didn't have any idea how many people. So we said, okay, several billion people. So if we pack them all into the living room with their wealth and their power and their knowledge and their tools and their genetic engineering, if I were to squish this spider, could they bring him back to life? And they said no. They were old enough to understand that. And I said, therefore, this life cannot be replaced. It is precious. I think that's the antidote to nihilism. And again, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite or be a hypocrite. There are times we try to take the ants out, we scoop them on paper plates, but a bunch of them go, eventually we will spray some with Raid, God forgive me. But we do the best we can not to take life wantonly, because it's precious. And that's the opposite of nihilism. And we're on the subject of nihilism. I think none of us likes Nietzsche, and yes, he was a deplorable, godless man, etc., etc. But Friedrich Nietzsche really did have some reasonable insights that, things like suffering and difficulty is inevitable, but things like necessity, when I think this is necessary, or I am suffering, that is not a fact, that's an interpretation. And to me, that has been, I've tried my best to make that a guiding principle, that necessity is not a fact, it's an interpretation of other facts.
I actually agree with very much of that, just about all of it. What I also find to be, interesting about nihilism is that it's almost a sense of escapism, that there's, nothing really worthwhile of investing in this world or this life, and so therefore we give it all up. We don't care about it. We seek to destroy it in some way because it really has no value. And part of the rejection of nihilism is, yes, teaching that life does have value and that life is precious, and life is precious. And I wonder if the only way to really convey that to people is through relationships that they have with one another, recognizing that there are other people in this world that we share it with and that their life has value as well. And maybe only if you recognize that in someone else can you truly come to believe that in other people and maybe even your own self.
And I'd agree with both. And I guess, part of what was challenging to me about the question is what felt like, and I may be completely wrong here, a premise of the question that there is sort of an epidemic of nihilism, or that there is more and more nihilism. And I think every generation has a certain amount of it. I look around, and it's like you talked about the presentations and the essays that were written by the young people. I actually think that we have an abundance of hope right now. And I particularly look at younger generations. And I guess part of my struggle is I'm not concerned with that question. Because I am filled with hope when particularly I look at the younger generations and their commitment to the value of life. And their commitment to making the world a better place. And so I think there's been people who have been nihilistic, and there always will be. And I think the antidote to that is hope. And I think there's always more hope.
So one of the question is, what is the antidote to arrogance?
Yeah, who's going to answer that one first?
So we just celebrated Passover. Did anyone here who's not Jewish attend a Passover Seder? Oh, that's wonderful. I imagine that there are far more non-Jewish people in the room, though, than actually attended the Seder. So the first thing I want to say is if you're ever curious or interested in Judaism, please know that the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center is always welcoming to you. So if you have questions or you're interested in knowing more about the Jewish community in Pasadena, please just give us a call. I'd love to set up a meeting with you and get to know you a little bit better, and we'd love to have you. And part of that is an extension of our community Passover Seder that we hold every year on the second night of Passover for people to come and enjoy. And that's always open to the public as well, Jewish or not Jewish. Now, the reason why I bring Passover up, because the question was about what's the antidote to arrogance in our world. And I wonder if part of that is just extreme humility. But that takes a really strong image to also look at. So I want you to imagine a loaf of bread for just a second. Right? A loaf of bread symbolizes an inflated sense of self, an arrogant ego, someone who believes that they are the creator of their own world, that they are the center of it, that they are responsible for all the beauty and the glory that this world beholds, and so therefore they are due in feeling that they are so great and so godlike. And that becomes most of us over the course of the year, because we forget about all the ways that other people are actually involved in our lives and how much we actually take from this world as a result of simply being an organic creature of it. That we contribute maybe not that much back and far less in terms of what the world gives back to us. And so that inflated sense of self comes full round when it comes to Passover, and we end up searching for the crumbs of that after we clean out our homes of what we call chametz, which are the crumbs of that inflated ego that we've left over in our world, in our houses, in the rooms that we've inhabited. And we clean that out, and then at one point at Passover, actually just before Passover begins, we burn those crumbs. We say goodbye to them, because we'd rather start anew as being a piece of flat matzah. Has anyone ever tasted matzah? Okay, they're like giant saltines, right? So you know that they're not decorated with anything. And if anyone gives you a matzah, right, that has any sort of flavor to it, that's not real matzah. Okay, this is meant to be the bread of affliction. This is meant to be a poor person's bread. And so if you were to enjoy that matzah and truly ingest it, then perhaps we would see ourselves as being a little bit more flat, about not being such grandiose creatures in the world, but realizing that we actually have something very simple to contribute, and that can just be the basic sense of who we are, and that may actually just be enough.
What does the highest level of faith in all three faith traditions look like in practice? Please give the most poignant, practical example you can think of.
Question again?
Can you read that one?
Yeah.
What does the highest level of faith in your own tradition look like? Give the most poignant, practical example you can think of.
So I think that the highest level of faith, the highest expression of belief in God and gratitude to God, is service and mercy to his creatures, big and small. Some years ago at the Islamic Center, we honored a woman. She was a white Christian woman. Her daughter came home from school one day sad, from kindergarten. Why are you sad? My friend, he was crying. Why is your friend crying? His father is sick. Who was his father? His father was an African-American Muslim man that this woman had never met. She investigated. It turned out that this man had end-stage renal failure and needed a kidney. She had never seen this man. She had never met this man. She donated her kidney to him, and 5 years later, we were celebrating them both. It's practical. It's straightforward. It doesn't get higher than that.
After that, yeah, let's get rid of that. In Paul's letter to the Philippians, he says, have the same mind as you that was in Christ Jesus, who did not see equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied the divine self, and taking the form of a servant. And it's really a long-winded way of saying what you just said. It is about emptying ourselves. It is what Greg Boyle talks about standing on the margins until the margins disappear from under our feet. The Christian tradition teaches us that we meet Jesus in those who are most marginalized, targeted, and oppressed, and that not just our job, but our greatest joy is, as we are not those people, if we are not those people, giving ourselves in love for those among us who are most targeted, marginalized, and oppressed. And the great thing is we know tons of examples of how that is done. The example that you gave of your father, the story that you told is a story of that, of just, it is that practice of self-giving love that is the highest marker of faith.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I'm struck by, you made this mention, Reverend, about hope, right? That there's more of an epidemic of hope than there is of nihilism. I appreciated that, I really did. I'm really struck by all those teens that were marching shortly after the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And I remember the first time a student asked me about a school shooting. Can you imagine that I have to say that? The first time a student asked me about after a school shooting. He asked me, why does God sit back on his chair when other people are suffering or other people are in pain? And those are the moments where there's really kind of no faith, where you wonder where God is and what you're supposed to have faith in. And so I would probably argue that the highest form of faith is the type of faith we show one another and willingness to show up when you have no other faith in God, or where you fear where that faith in God has been lost. And the willingness, like you're saying, to be there for one another when we're in pain, right, to love from the self in that way to each of God's creatures is an extreme form of faith when you don't believe that there's anything else out there that will possibly save you, to believe that we are each other's saviors in that way.
Gasser, is there or can there be a Muslim equivalent of the Eucharist?
That's above my pay grade. These gentlemen are professionals. I'm a volunteer.
Can I ask you a question about that, though?
Sure.
Is there a Muslim, the heart of the Eucharist is just breaking bread with each other.
Yeah.
And one comment to Reverend Kinman was that the month of Ramadan is coming soon for Muslims. I learned that All Saints will host iftar. Can you share?
Yeah.
We're hosting iftar on May 21st. So, yes.
So I think that the equivalent, of course, of the Eucharist, with very frank and respectful view of the differences, in that we, of course, do not consider Jesus, as I said, peace be upon him, the Word of God, the Spirit of God, a mercy from God, but we do not consider him God. But our equivalent of the Eucharist is, of course, comes in every Ramadan iftar after the fasting, when the spirit of Ramadan is to break bread together, Muslim and non-Muslim. And the teaching of Ramadan is that, have you seen the one who gives the lie to the faith? I'm now quoting from the Quran from a chapter called Al-Ma'un. And so the question is asking for a definition. And who is that one? The Quran says, الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. The one who is harsh to the orphan and does not care about feeding the poor. It is not the one who doesn't worship in this way, or who doesn't believe in heaven or doesn't believe in hell. The definitional component of the one who gives the lie to the faith is someone who does not care or serve others. And so the reminder of that becomes most poignant to us in the month of Ramadan, and the practice that is present in Muslim countries known as Mawa'id al-Rahman, the tables of the most gracious, most merciful, where people, whether they are rich or poor, set up tables on the sidewalks and fill them with food, as much or as little as they have, so that those who do not have after the day of fasting can come to those tables and eat, no questions asked.
How do you best handle people who may be in your inner circle if they have no spiritual dimension?
Please.
Well, I think part of it is recognizing that I'm taking a note from Reverend Kinman's playbook in terms of disagreeing with the premise of the question, right? Which is the sense of absolutism about the fact that nobody has, what's the question say, that they don't have any,
Spiritual dimension.
that there is no spiritual dimension. And that's just it's just not possible, I think, to believe within the Jewish system that people have no opportunity or possibility for a spiritual dimension in their lives, that, you know, we are human beings, we are limited and we are fallible in our own right, and, you know, within that is the opportunity for great growth. So I would have to believe that anyone who is simply willing to experiment with faith in some form in their life would have to be also open and capable of attaining some level or some knowledge or some sense of spirituality in their life, some sense that they are connected to something much greater than themselves, that human beings are inherently open to that. I think that's part of the metaphor of the cup that I was teaching about before, that people are inherently vessels that can either be full or empty. It's a matter of how we look at the world. And if you choose to fill your cup with things like materialism or fame or wealth or power, you're going to inherently always find yourself empty. However, if you invest yourself in things that are truly meaningful, things that truly have a spiritual depth to them or a worthiness and bring meaning to life, true meaning and value to life, then your cup will always be full. But it's a matter of a choice that we have, and we have to recognize that we're capable of either one of those dispositions.
And I would just say that, I mean, absolutely, and if the essence of God is love, then love and compassion, these are the most powerful forces for transformation in the cosmos. And so what you do is you meet everyone with that place of compassion, with that place of love. You know, I have people in my immediate family who reject a belief in God, or who reject certainly religious institutions, but we can still meet in that place of, it's kind of Rumi's field, in that place that's beyond that, the place that is a place of love and compassion. And, you know, I can honor and love what I see as the divine in them. They can honor the same thing in me, even though they wouldn't use the same term.
So, spirituality versus religion, which should be preached in mosques, churches, and temples?
Both. See, I think religion is the structure. It's the framework, right? It's the most idealized state of what we're trying to achieve, whatever that is. And each of us have our own structure for getting there, right? We're all building a tower or a roadway or a pathway to something, right? They're just built in different ways. And they take us on different journeys. And that's the religious structure. But the spirituality element of it, that's the kind of glue that holds it all together, right? That's the cement of it all. Because if you're not trying to get at something higher than all of that, than the religious strictures, if you're only going by the literalness of the law, right, and not the spiritual practice of it, the things that really make it all that better, right, then you've really lost something. So I'll give you an example. I wrestle with my community over this all the time. I would love for them to be more in line with certain specific Jewish practices. Shabbat, for example, it's we consider it a 25-hour period where we distance ourselves from material things in this world and we try to enjoy time as it passes by with all the people that we love. And part of that spiritual practice is really kind of just leading a real basic life with what you have at that moment and trying to spend time with people and not rush Shabbat out of your life. But the problem is that I have a lot of young families in my community who want to bring these lovely rituals to their kids, and their kids don't stay up so late until the end of Shabbat, particularly when daylight savings times comes around, right? So Shabbat ends at like 8 o'clock at night and there are a lot of kids in bed. But in order to make that moment special for families and whatnot, the end of Shabbat, that is, we end Shabbat a little bit earlier with a beautiful ritual known as Havdalah, which makes a mention of the separation between holy time and regular time during the course of the week, where we say goodbye to this investment in time that we spent in Shabbat of the last 25 hours and move on to the regular course of the mundane work week. But teaching their kids that opportunity to sanctify time in that way and the passage of time is really important to them. So rather than remaining within the strict structure of the law to say that Shabbat's got to end at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night to observe it fully, we go with the spirit of the law, the thing that actually brings people together rather than separates them out, that makes it more enjoyable, that makes it accessible, that makes it meaningful for them. And so while we need the structure to remind us of what we're actually trying to achieve, right, we also need something that actually holds it all together from just its kind of natural idealized state, which is often impossible for people.
I think religion is the path to spirituality. And again, I think we need to be very wise and also very straightforward. There has to be a practical reason why I am a Muslim other than accident of birth. It should be a deliberate choice, as it is a choice for the Reverend to be a Christian and a choice for the Rabbi to be a Jew. And I quote from the Quran that say those who believe, meaning believe in the path of Muhammad, the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Sabians, all who believe in God and the last day and do righteous deeds, upon them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. So the Quran says that God will guide to his paths. And it uses the term subulana, our paths, plural paths. So from each of these great edifices of monotheism, I believe that the most successful will be the most spiritual. And the Quran makes a very clear statement that anyone who has the deep belief in God and does righteous deeds, there shall be no fear upon them, nor shall they grieve. And then beyond that, it becomes an intellectual matter of conviction and a spiritual experience and connection with God. What deliberate choice, which path do I deliberately choose toward God? And to pretend that the paths are the same, I think is unreasonable and is not our task or mandate. But for anyone to say that my path is better is, again, as we heard from the poem, that is God's job, not our job. But the test is don't sit on the sidelines. Don't sit by the side of the road and watch life go by. Pick a path and start walking.
One of the questions was, is spirituality genetic or can it be acquired? But it's something to think about. This question says, what is the one thing each of you finds beautiful about the religion of the other two speakers?
So Jews like to ask a lot of questions. And I swear to God, I wish there were days they would just submit. I wish there were days the questions would stop. Sometimes I wish that there was simply a level of acceptance, of a willingness to say this is what it is, rather than to constantly wrestle with it. Wrestling it within sometimes just kind of kicks the can down the road. There's always an argument to be had later on. Sometimes I wish we would just submit and accept it. And then sometimes I wish we would take that element of service that Reverend Kinman preaches from a real internal and personal level much more seriously. much more seriously. We love the idea of tikkun olam and repairing the world and making it a better place for future generations, and that's nice. And most oftentimes it seems as like a convenient salve. Whenever we feel guilty about how bad the world might be, there's always an opportunity for tikkun olam, for repair of the world. But that's not the same as saying I am inherently meant to be of service to this world. And that's what I appreciate from my fellow colleague.
I'll say, and actually my answer is going to be similar for what I appreciate and just adore, and in some ways envy about the practice of these other two faiths. And it's about the sanctification of life. One of the things I love about Judaism is the idea of, it's a practice of Shabbat. It is the orienting of the family life, the community life, yes, the congregation life, but the family life around this practice of everything stops. And we realize that we're sanctifying our relationships and that God is present in the family. And we tell the story. And it's a way of grounding family life in the divine on just on a weekly basis. That is, I miss that, and I think Christianity, because we have such overprivilege in this society, that has some huge downsides to it, and I love Judaism practice of Shabbat and the idea that 1 out of 7 days you do no work and you concentrate on that, and the family rituals, the house rituals about that. And then for Islam, it is the daily prayer, the 5 times a day, stopping, and that there's a call to prayer, and that we're reminded 5 times a day that we need to orient ourselves towards God. And again, it is that just regular sanctification of life and orienting it Godward is something that I apologize if my understanding of these things as it is imperfect, but I just find such deep beauty in that.
It sounded perfect to me. Okay. But for me, it is the notion that all three faiths share the idea that there is a standard beyond our standard that regular humans go through their day-to-day lives with. We all, I think, no matter how faithful we say we are, think we are, have adopted to lesser or greater degrees a certain standard of judgment as to who is successful in this world and who is not. And exactly as the Reverend was saying, those who are at the margins are considered to be the ones who have not somehow succeeded. And I think the thing that I love most about the other two faiths is that we share together a collective understanding that the standard we humans use to make those judgments is very feeble and very ephemeral, and that there is a much bigger and truer standard, and that each and every one of us realizes that, yes, you have the billionaire businessman who owns the business tower in which he works, and all of us recognize that his humble, illiterate doorman can truly be a much better and more successful human being than he is, because he has a smile on his face and he has compassion in his heart and he asks about the sick and he shares what little he has. And it is easy for all three of us to very straightforwardly understand that that doorman is the success story, not the billionaire.
And for Muslims, many have asked, how do we become more spiritual? Is it reading the Quran? Is it praying more? How do we go to another level? And I think if we not just read more, but read more broadly, and remember that Rumi was Muslim and Hafiz was Muslim. Hafiz spoke of God, not the God of labels, not the God of do's and don'ts, but the God who says, "Come dance with me." On that note, I want to close the panel with a poem of my father. Friends in faith, rise while you still have a choice. On the wings of love, soar above and sing with your hearts, not only your voice. God is love, God is love, God is love. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. This was wonderful.
As the last item on our program today, I'd like to ask you to please direct your attention to the screens for a video presentation.
Doctor, I don't know why God does this, but he seems to like to test us in many ways, particularly in faith. Even great men with strong faith have been tested. Has your test or your faith in Islam ever been tested?
Yes, of course. I think human life is a test, because when God created humanity, it was to create a different creature, a different species. And given knowledge and a choice and accountability makes life a test.
What about pain? How about the pain of life, the pain of living,
Yes.
the pain of loss?
Yes.
What about that?
Yes. This is part of the test, and I think if all you know that you live this world and then go underground, then pain would seem purposeless and rather cruel in so many cases.
How have you been tested, pain-wise?
Well, perhaps the most important incident in my life is one day when I was starting a new job in Kuwait, and my wife and daughter stayed in Edinburgh for the wife to finish her PhD. And one day, finishing an operation, I was told there is a cable for me. Something in my heart said my daughter has died. The cable itself read, "Amal killed, accident." Amal was my daughter. She was the only one at the time.
How old was she?
She was 5. And my immediate response, God, I know you are looking at me. I know you are watching how I behave. I know you are testing me. I hope to pass the test. If this is what you decreed for me, I accept it. I accept it. I accept it. She has been your trust with us. She is now our trust with you. And this foreshortened the whole stages of reaction when someone is so afflicted to merely nothing. And then I knew patience is rewardable, that if I am patient, it will be for my good.
Islam gave you that power?
It is exactly the wording of the Prophet saying, I am amazed for the affairs of the faithful. If he gets something good, he is grateful, and this is good for him. If he gets something painful, he is patient, and this is good for him. So either way, it's a win-win situation. Of course, the dimension of separation from my daughter was a very important one to me, but never was bitter or protested or why me or what did I do to you?
Come on, that never crossed your mind?
Never, never.
You lose your 5-year-old daughter in an
Yes.
accident you don't expect,
Yes.
and you don't look up to the God that you've trusted
What you-
and say, why me?
What he accepts for me, I accept for myself very trustingly, and knowing that it is for my good somehow.
When it's time for you to leave this earth, what are you going to leave us?
I'll try to leave the same thing I'm trying to take with me. And there is a teaching of the Prophet that when a human being dies, he is completely cut off from this life, except for 3 things that can go with him. The one is a perpetual charity.
Mm-hmm.
The second is good knowledge that can be good to good use. And the third is a progeny who are good and pray God for him. I try to implant them here so that when I leave them. When I go, I take their blessings with me.
I actually have one comment just by Dr. Gesser he'd like to make before we finish.
I actually thought that Abbat was going to make this comment, but it's all the same. But I thought you should know that, as I said, I have seen it. This man was one of the people I have seen it in. And you should know that surrounding this incident, when he flew to Edinburgh, his wife, who of course was holding the daughter in her hand when the truck jumped the curb and killed her, forgive me if I'm a little moved, went to apologize. And he put his finger on her lips and took her hand, and he said, "Don't fall prey to the whispers of Satan. This is God's will, and we submit." His next act was to go to the apartment. She used to love chocolates and would have a box and would take one bite from each piece. He wasn't there, of course, for his daughter's death. So he ate every last piece of that box as his goodbye to his daughter. And then he went to court and he pled for clemency for the driver. That the driver was not drunk, he was not malicious, that it was simply an accident on God's will, and he asked the judge for maximum leniency for the man. So it does happen. It really is out there, and we just need to be diligent in trying to achieve it. And at the beginning and the end, it's God's mercy who does and who does not, and we hope for his mercy and trust in it. Thank you. I just thought you should know.
So I already mentioned that after 20 minutes after the event concludes, we'll have the Asr prayer, and until then, the buffet is welcome. You are welcome to it until 5 p.m. Lastly, for the foundation, the Hassan Hathout Foundation, to continue to grow, we require your continued support. If you've enjoyed today's program or any of our various initiatives, please, we are always eager for volunteers, for suggestions, and for donations, either now at or at our website, hhlf.org, where you can also see the Hassan Hathout library, which we have compiled. Also, if you'd like to subscribe to our email list to be aware of future events, please do send an email to info@hhlf.org. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's program. I hope that we can all take home and implement some of the lessons that we've learned today, and that the friendships we have formed within and across faiths can continue to grow. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.